And today we're going to do minimal viable code on how to do location stuff using Swift. Now, location stuff comes in a handful of varieties. The important thing to understand is that map and location support are two different things. Now, you obviously need location support to do anything interesting with maps, and you need maps to be able to display any interesting location data if you want to display it like as a map. But those are two different things. And so we're going to look at location support first, then we'll look at what map supports second. Apple calls map MapKit. You've seen over and over again that these extended components of iOS development involve something kit. Map kit, health kit, web kit, all these kinds of things are X-Kit type stuff. And similarly to all those other ones, a lot of functionality is totally built into this and makes your life 1,000 times easier. So let's go ahead and start out with location data, and then we'll use that location data to drive some interesting displays of it in a map. So I'm going to start out here with a single view app. Give it an interesting name. I'm going to be working in storyboard mode. You could easily do this in Swift UI, but we're going to do just kind of normal old Swift with storyboard. Now, one of the important things you have to understand about location data is that it's privacy issue laden. All right, so in the same way that you have to request information or access the user's health kit data, you have to do the same thing to request information to use the user's location data. And so we access that using a plist file. Plist will allow us to trigger all that kind of requests. It also handles a handful of different things. The important thing inside the plist we're going to look at first, though, is that when you ask for location data, it pops up a little window that says, will you let this app use your location? And then underneath there, you explain why you want to use that location data. Now, on a normal app that we're going to launch for real, we'll really craft that messaging to make sure it's very clear to the user what we're using it for. For our purposes, we're just going to put in some gobbledygook just to get it to clear the error message. And so let's get started on that. So the first thing you're going to do is open up the plist file, and then you're going to go down to the bottom of the plist file. And if you roll over one of these items, plist is just a giant list of settings, basically, for behind the scenes. And if you hit this plus button, it allows you to have a new kind of plist. Unfortunately, typing it directly in here is problematic because you might have a typo. So I like to scroll down into the privacy area. And the two that we need to worry about are first, location always and location when in use. Those are two different things to understand about location data inside of iOS. You can have your app request always give me the location data, no matter if the user's using the location or not, or using the app or not. Or you can just have location data available when the app is in the forefront. Now, if you're using it always, there's a lot of weird parameters around that we'll kind of touch on. But the main factor to consider is that does use up users' data battery. iOS does a pretty good job of trying to manage that, and so if your app is in the background, it's not giving you exact GPS locations. It's doing some crude triangulation based on cell towers that it sees, based on Wi-Fi signals that it sees, and based on actual GPS information that it sees, and kind of does some crude calculation to get relatively accurate results. You're not going to use this to do anything down to like the nearest 3 feet or something like that. In fact, one of the things you need to understand about location data is that it's very, at a small scale, widely inaccurate. I developed an app early on when I was doing iPhone stuff that I thought was going to be awesome, and I programmed it all and got it all working, and then tried it on an actual device and it fell apart, and I never launched it. And that app was actually, I thought was cool, was an alarm clock that the only way you could make it turn off is if you actually moved your phone. So the idea was, your alarm clock would go off and it wouldn't turn off until you walked with your phone over to your coffee maker or something like that. The problem with that is that the GPS we have access to is not military grade, and so it varies very constantly. So every time you ping the GPS, it's going to return something that could be between 3 meters off to 30 meters off. It's not super precise like military grade GPS. And so every time I would ping the GPS request inside the device, it would bounce all over. And once I put it on my phone and could actually test it for real, it bounced all over my house as to where it thought I was. This is the same reason why if you use something like Find My iPhone, it'll say it's in the house, but you can't really look at it until it's in the living room or it's in the kitchen or whatever. This is not that precise. It's just kind of broad sense of where you are. Okay, so that's one important thing to understand location data. And so we need to request access to that stuff. And so let's go into here. And the important ones that you need to worry about, at least for our purposes today, for minimal viable code, is location, always, usage, description, or location, always, and when in use, usage, description. So this is what's the message, the string, the message that you want to display in the message box. I'm just going to put in here, this is a demo. But you would put in some kind of interesting information that was relative to what your app was actually about. And then another one that if we don't put it in, we'll often get an error message is location when in use, usage description. So make another one of these. Scroll down to privacy again. All right, so we're going to do that. And then the last thing we need to do is say, hey, I am going to make use of location data. And so we need to kind of turn that on. All right, and so to do that, we need to go into our view controller. If you recall, view controller is where the main stuff that's controlling the view lives. And so inside of there, we got to say, hey, I want to start getting some location data. And specifically, the stuff I want to get is called core location. This will allow us to be able to grab location data out of the user's phone and do stuff with it. Once I have my view controller set up like this and I've imported it, I also need to do what's called a location manager. A location manager is a thing that's kind of constantly checking to see what's happening, and it allows you to do stuff with it. So you can think of this as almost like an event handler from a language like JavaScript, where it's going to handle all the location stuff that's triggering. So if the user's moving the device for significant amounts, that kind of stuff, it'll trigger different kinds of things inside Location Manager. There's a lot of stuff that you should probably get some background knowledge on around Location Manager that's inside of Apple's documentation, but the important thing to understand here is that there's a variety of different things you can do with Location Manager. For instance, you can make it so that it only triggers a location change when the user moves from one important location to another. An important location to another can be determined in a variety of different ways at the OS level. So for instance, Apple has a database of locations in the world, like restaurants and things like that, and it will know when you're entering one of those new locations and will trigger something. So it's not just if you're just walking down the street, but actually you go into a place and stay there for a while, that'll trigger some kind of location change. Or the user's onboard device is actually also tracking important locations to the user. So for instance, at the device level, now this is not shared with Apple, so you don't need to worry about privacy concerns, but at the device level, it's watching to see where your common locations are. So that might be your home, your place of work, maybe a classroom that you have, that sort of thing. Common locations that you're going to are also registered as important locations as well for this kind of service. So we're going to kind of look into some location management stuff, but before we can do any of that, we actually have to create ourselves a location manager. So I'm going to create a variable called location manager, and it's going to hold a core location manager. So core location CL, that's CL location manager. And so now location manager is my stand-in for an instance of a core location manager. All right, so once I have that, I can start setting up my location manager in the view to load. The first thing I'm going to do is make it so that on the location manager I just created, I want to make it so that this view controller can be a delegate between what I see on screen, what my computer is doing, and that sort of thing, and the location management system. And so that means I need to set up the location manager. Its delegate is equal to self, so we can manage the location manager. This should throw an error message that will tell me, yep, great. You can see that location manager, that view controllers do not have the built-in superpower of core location manager delegates. So I just need to hit fix, and I'll add it right here. And so now I have that superpower. And then when the view loads, I want to request that I can get access to the location. This will trigger the user's, did I misspell that? It would help if I spelled it correctly. This will trigger that message that says, hey, will you let this app see your location data? And then what I'm going to do is say, hey, location manager, as long as we're running here, I want you to constantly update my starting location. So I want you to be constantly updating my location. Now this isn't triggering every second or every millisecond or anything like that. It's triggering every time that the device thinks it's moving a significant amount. And we'll kind of show you, I'll show you what that looks like in a minute when we demo it inside the simulator. And specifically, I don't want to just be updating locations. I want to be only watching for when I'm hitting significant changes. And again, of course, I misspelled Location Manager. And for now, just to test to make sure everything works inside of our simulator, we'll just simply print where this device thinks that it is. Let's give it a run. Great, and you can see it's doing exactly what I want to do, which is pop up this authorization. You can see this is also a demo. That's the text that I typed into that plist file. And I'm going to say always allow while using app. And you can see down here that we have no location. And that's because this is a simulated file. This is not inside of a real thing. So I need to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? Let's simulate this device being in a specific location. And so if you go here into features in the simulator, you can simulate where we are. So we're going to say that we're on a city bicycle ride. And once we have that city bicycle ride running, we're going to go ahead and modify the location manager so that we can do something simple. Like let's just make it so that we're calculating the distance between two different locations between last time that the location manager registered a change to where you are right now. And so what I'm going to do is create a function, and I'll use a location manager stuff that's built in. And the specific location manager that I want to run is this one right here. And this is a did update location. So this is only going to fire when we think that we've changed a significant amount location-wise. I'm going to hide this so that we get a little bit more room. And what I'm going to do is create an array of locations, and I'll constantly be updating it. So I'm going to start off by saying all locations and it's an array of CL locations. And what we're going to do is take this array and constantly populate it. So at first we're going to just put the first location in, then the next time that we get an update, we're going to put the next location in, etc. And it's going to be becoming a gigantically long array. Now, if we're going to run this for a long, long time, that's going to be some major memory issues. But for us, for our purposes, just really quick demo of how we can use these things, this is all we're going to do. So once we have our all locations array set up, I'm going to create a little internal variable for this function called most recent location. And that's whatever locations thinks we are. And locations right here is the array of locations that's being returned by the did update locations. And I'm going to say, hey, whatever the most recent one was. So give me the most recent location that we've registered. Did I misspell that? Probably. Okay. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and check to see if our all locations is greater than 1. And the reason we're doing that is very simple. If this is the very first time that this is ever run, what we're about to do is calculate the difference between two different locations, the most recent one that we just created and the last one in this all locations array. If we don't have anything inside that all locations array, then we can't do this calculation and it'll crash. So we're just going to make sure that we're only doing this for the very first one. And I'm going to create another internal variable called distance between last two locations. And what that's going to do is take most recent location, which is right here, and calculate the distance between it, and distance is built inside of core location stuff, from And so what this is going to do is calculate the distance between our most recently registered location and the last slot in all locations. So the most, the newest, oldest location, that distance from that to where we currently are. And then we're just going to print out that value. And then at the very end, we're going to take all locations and append to the end of that array our most recent location. So now the next time this runs, the newest old location is where we currently are. So you can think of this as like a timeline. We're moving 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When this gets called the first time, so on step 1, it's saying 1's location. Think of going down a street. The first house on the street gets saved into most recent location. It's not going to run this because we don't have any other locations in all locations yet. And then it's going to save the first house's location into the first slot into all locations. Then as we move down the street and we reach the next house, this will fire again. The second house will be saved temporarily into most recent location. And then this will run because there already is something in all locations. You can think of all locations as all the old locations. And then runs a calculation of distance between the first house and the second house. And then prints out the results of that, and then saves the second house at the end of the array into all locations. And then it runs again for the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. Okay, and so when I run this, it should just print out into the log motion. Okay, now what's cool about this is that in my simulator, I can not just say, hey, I'm at one specific location. I'm going to simulate something like a city run. And what this should do is that over time, it will update this location, and I'll see it pop up here. You can see this is the basic stuff that's happening. So it's saying, hey, they're about this location, they're moving at about this speed, and they're headed in this orientation at this timestamp. Very, very cool and very useful. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is, once we have location data, that's not very useful. We actually want to show it as a map. Now we can use this location data to do things like calculate the distance between you and the nearest restaurant and showing that in a table view, for instance, to see all the different restaurants are near you and you can see which ones are closer. We can certainly use this information, but the important thing that we want to do is not just use this information. The important thing we want to do is show this information in a map. And so I'm going to hop over to my storyboard and add a map once it loads. And we have built into Xcode MapKit views, which will show a map. In fact, if I just run this, it'll show me a map. Not just any map, but a map of the world. Or the United States, rather. All right? And this map doesn't give me any information, even though the device clearly knows where we are. You can see it right there. It's not showing me that on the map. And so what I'm going to do is make it so this map centers to the user's current location. To do that, we're going to extend MapKit powers. And we're going to do that outside the view controller. And then we'll call this extension later. We're going to create a function inside of this extension called center to location. And what this will do is center the map to my user's current location. We're going to create a location variable, or we're going to set an attribute for location called CL location, or location that will be a CL location. And then how far out from that location we want the radius of what's being drawn. And we'll say we'll go out 1,000 units. You can see it's giving me some error messages, and that's very simple. It's because I haven't also imported MapKit. So let's import MapKit. Oops. Now what I'm doing is just basically setting up all the settings that I need for to be able to update the map in using MapKit. A lot of this kind of stuff you're never going to memorize. This is a great example of copy and paste. And so, looks like I might have misspelled something. All right, this code right here is one of those great examples of something you just simply copy and paste to use it in the future. It just lets me get the center of the map kit to the current location, or to a location that I feed it. Then the second to last thing I need to do is tie my storyboard to my view controller so that I can modify that map kit. And so I'm going to do that in the same way that I do everything else. Just drag this over and make that connection, just like you would do just about anything out of the storyboard. And I'm going to call this connection map view. Now, whenever I reference map view, I'm referencing this specific MapKit display. And then what I need to do is my location manager is constantly firing when there are changes to the location. So rather than just simply printing out all this stuff, that's since the view did load, we don't need that anymore. Rather than simply printing out the distance that I've moved from the last handful of locations, I'm going to go ahead and update the map. Remember that center 2 location that I created up above? Great. Well, all I'm going to do is feed into it most recent location, and we're good to go. Of course, it helps to spell things right. And so now my map will draw in my app, zoom into the location that I am, and I'm going to be feeding it a bike ride, and it'll slowly but surely update this map as my mythological bike moves along the path. That should do it for everything you need to know just to get started with maps and locations.